Alright, so today we're looking at patterns of inheritance. Main idea is that inheritance is observable. Okay, even without knowing about genes, chromosomes, DNA, all that type of stuff, you can still observe inheritance in everyday life. And you've probably observed it in your own life. For me, I've seen my inheritance of traits from my mother and father. Okay, I noticed that I have a nose that's more like my dad. Um, my jawline might be more like my mum's or my teeth. Um, but by looking at me, you can probably tell that I most likely resemble more of my dad, whereas my sister tend to resemble more of my mum. And you've probably seen that in your own life, where you may have, when you see relatives, they may say, "Oh, you've got your father's nose," or something like that, or your mother's eyes, those types of things. And excuse me for a sec, just to make sure this is recording. Farmers or people from hundreds to thousands of years ago were able to notice this as well. They noticed that, hey, this sheep that is extremely large, for example, all of its offspring tend to be pretty large as well. Or, oh, here's a banana plant that, its bananas taste kind of sweet. And they noticed that, oh, if they planted the seeds, the plants that grew from those seeds would also tend to have fruit that would resemble that of its parents. Okay, so those traits seem to be passed down from parent to offspring. And through hundreds to thousands of years of domestication, we now have many of the fruits, vegetables, and animals that we have today. So this is an example of a wild banana. So one of the earliest people who studied this deliberately and scientifically was this man called Gregor Mendel. He was a monk in Europe, and he's now known as the father of modern genetics for his work with pea plants. So when he was looking at peas, he noticed these 7 or so traits that you could use to describe peas. So like how we might use height, eye color, or hair color to distinguish people, he noticed these 7 traits. And what he did was he would take some pea plants that were expressing one of these traits, for example, a purple flower, and he would pair that deliberately with a pea plant that was expressing the alternative trait, such as having a white flower. And when he paired these, what he observed was that in each case, for each of these traits, if you took an organism that expressed one of these, okay, by the way, this is a purebred organism, so by that we mean if you had a purple flowering pea plant that had parents that only ever had purple flowers and its parents only ever had purple flowers, that's what we mean by a purebred organism. Okay, it wasn't just he plucked a purple flower, this was a deliberately chosen plant. He noticed that when you cross these two together, instead of getting, a half purple, half white plant, or all white plants, or all purple plants, actually no, what he did notice was that you got all purple plants. Okay, same thing with each of these traits. If you paired a yellow yellow seed producing plant with a green seed producing plant, all of the offspring were yellow. So these traits down the bottom here, or in the middle, seem to have disappeared in this first generation. Okay, so the parents in the P generation produced all purple plants in the F generation. So just what do some of those words mean? Well, if we take a purple plant, and for white I'm going to use black, just the opposite, white. Okay, we can call this P1, or P, the parental generation. Now the pairing of these two in the F1 generation, F stand for filial, meaning son. So the first filial generation, all of these organisms were purple. So this white trait seems to have disappeared. But what Mendel did was he took two of these organisms, okay, specifically these purple flowering plants, and he paired them together. And what he noticed was they would produce 3 purple plants, roughly, for every one white flowering plant. Okay, so in the F2 generation, this white trait reappeared. And this wasn't just for flower color either. This was for each of these traits. Okay, you could repeat the same thing where in the F1 generation, the green peas would disappear, but in the F2 generation, they'd come back at a ratio of 3 yellow to 1 green. And so what he concluded was that for each trait, an organism must be carrying 2 factors. Okay, so it must get some information or factors affecting its traits. It must get one from each of its parents. Okay, and the other conclusion he made was that when a parent is passing on these factors onto its offspring, each of its gametes, or each, for example, piece of pollen, is only going to contain one of those factors. Okay, and each pollen would receive a gamete, or would receive a copy of this factor that was independent to another pollen. Okay, so to a different gamete. By that I mean, let's say you have a plant that has purple, has one purple factor and another, let's just say it has a white factor as well. Okay, when it makes its gametes, each gamete gets a choice of either purple or white. It's kind of like a coin flip. Okay, there's a 50-50 chance that you're going to get purple, and it's just as likely that you're going to get white. Okay, so this separation of these factors is why this is called the law of segregation. Okay, so now that we know a little bit more about what's causing these traits, instead of using this word factor, we use this word instead, allele or allele. And basically what they are alternative versions of a gene. Remember that a gene codes for just for a trait, okay, or through a protein it codes for a trait. And there can be many versions of the same gene. Okay, so there'll be a gene, for example, for chin type. Okay, and there are 2 versions of those genes that you can have. We call those 2 different versions alleles. And those alleles can be grouped or categorized into either dominant or recessive. Okay, now if you look it up online, you're going to find a slightly more complicated version than what we're learning. For now, just worry about dominant and recessive. Don't worry about any in-betweens or other combinations. So what do these words mean? Well, the simple rule is that if it's a dominant allele, if you have one dominant allele, it's going to express itself. Okay, it doesn't matter what the other allele is, it will make it sure that whatever it codes for will happen. Compare that to a recessive allele, where it will only express itself if there is no dominant allele present. So basically you have to have 2 of the same recessive allele for the trait to be expressed. So just going back to here, if you have, remember that you'll get two versions of the same gene, one from your mother, one from your father. If you receive just a single dominant allele for any of these traits, it doesn't matter what your second allele is, you will be expressing that trait. That also means that if you do express any of these recessive traits, it means that both of your alleles are for this recessive trait. Otherwise, you wouldn't be seeing this, you would be seeing whatever your dominant allele is coding for. So think about it like people. If you have a really dominant person, they are going to express themselves. It doesn't matter what who else is around them, okay, whoever else is in their friend group or in their immediate vicinity, they will make sure that their ideas are expressed. You will know that they are there. Compare that to someone who's more reclusive or recessive. For example, if they are paired with a dominant person, you are not going to hear this person speak. Okay, they will not express themselves. You will only see or hear from them if they are paired with a second recessive allele. Okay, in this case, the recessive allele will be the same type, so it's kind of like having a clone of yourself, but that's when you will see a recessive trait. Okay, so Now that we know about alleles, we can talk a little bit more about talking about an organism's genes. So what a genotype is we are writing down what those two alleles are. And the two simple rules we have are that if it's a dominant allele, we will use uppercase, and if it's a recessive allele, we are going to use lowercase. The letter that you choose, okay, each of these is represented by one letter, so you have full 26 letters to choose from. The letter you choose is normally linked to the trait you're looking at. For example, if you're looking at hair color, you may choose H, a capital H, to be your dominant, so that I believe that is brown hair, and lowercase h will represent blonde hair. Okay, the only things I would be careful of are if you're using letters like P. For example, if I want to talk about color, I could use purple, so I could use the letter P. Sorry, so the capital P would be purple, but the problem with that is that lowercase p looks really similar. Same thing with C for color. Okay, you can use it, but if you do, make sure you're very, very, very clear. So for the purposes of this, I'll be talking about capital A being purple and lowercase a being white. So when we look at genotypes, you have some alternative combinations. Okay, you could have